Running the Enterprise Bean examples. Session beans provide a simple but powerful way to encapsulate business logic within an application. They can be accessed from remote Java clients, web service clients, and components running in the same server. In Chapter 23, Getting Started with Enterprise Beans, you built a stateful session bean named Converter Bean. This chapter examines the source code of 4 more session beans. Card Bean, a stateful session bean that is accessed by a remote client counter bean. A singleton session bean HelloServiceBean, a stateless session bean that implements a web service timer session bean. A stateless session bean that sets a timer. The following topics are addressed here. The card example is singleton session bean example. Counter a web service example. HelloService using the timer service handling exceptions. The cart example. The cart example represents a shopping cart in an online bookstore and uses a stateful session bean to manage the operations of the shopping cart. The beans client can add a book to the cart, remove a book, or retrieve the cart's contents. To assemble cart, you need the following code: session bean class cart bean remote business interface cart. All session beans require a session bean class. All enterprise beans that permit remote access must have a remote business interface. To meet the needs of a specific application, an enterprise bean may also need some helper classes. The card bean session bean uses 2 helper classes, book exception and id verifier, which are discussed in the section helper classes. The source code for this example is in the tut-install. Examples: EJB, card, directory, the business interface. The card business interface is a plain Java interface that defines all the business methods implemented in the bean class. If the bean class implements a single interface, that interface is assumed to the business interface. The business interface is a local interface unless it is annotated with the JAVX. EJB, remote annotation. The JAVX. EJB, local annotation is optional in this case. The bean class may implement more than one interface. In that case, the business interfaces must either be explicitly annotated, local or remote, or be specified by decorating the bean class with local or remote. However, the following interfaces are excluded when determining whether the bean class implements more than one interface: Java, I/O, serializable Java, I/O, externalizable any of the interfaces defined by the JAVX. EJB package. The source code for the card business interface follows: package com, sun, tutorial, java, EJB, import Java, util, list, import JAVX, EJB, remote public interface card public void initialize string person throws book exception. Public void initialize string person, string id throws book exception. Public void add book string title. Public void remove book string title throws book exception. Public list, string, get contents. Public void remove. Session bean class. The session bean class for this example is called card bean. Like any stateful session bean, the card bean class must meet the following requirements. The class is annotated. Stateful. The class implements the business methods defined in the business interface. Stateful session beans also may implement the business interface, a plain Java interface. It is good practice to implement the beans business interface. Implement any optional lifecycle callback methods, annotated. Post construct, pre-destroy, post-activate, and pre-passivate. Implement any optional business methods annotated. Remove. The source code for the card bean class follows: package com, sun, tutorial, java, EJB, import Java, util, array list, import Java, util, list, import JAVX, EJB, remove, import JAVX, EJB. Stateful public class card bean implements card string customer name, string customer id, list, string, Contents. Public void initialize string person throws book exception if person no throw new book exception no person not allowed. Else customer name equal person. Customer it equals 0. Contents equal new array list. String. Public void initialize string person. String id throws book exception if person no throw new book exception no person not allowed. Else customer name equal person. Id verifier id checker equal new id verifier. If id checker. Validate id customer id equal id. Else throw new book exception invalid id. Plus id. Contents equal new array list. String. Public void add book string title contents. Add title. Public void remove book string title throws book exception boolean result equal contents. Remove title. If result false throw new book exception title plus not in cart. Public list. String. Get contents return contents. Remove public void remove contents equal null. Lifecycle callback methods. A method in the bean class may be declared as a lifecycle callback method by annotating the method with the following annotations. Javax. Annotation. Post construct. Methods annotated with. Post construct are invoked by the container on newly constructed bean instances after all dependency injection has completed and before the first business method is invoked on the enterprise bean. Javax. Annotation. Pre-destroy. Methods annotated with. Pre-destroy are invoked after any method annotated. Remove has completed and before the container removes the enterprise bean instance. Javax. EJB. Post-activate. Methods annotated with. Post-activate are invoked by the container after the container moves the bean from secondary storage to active status. Javax. EJB. Pre-passivate. Methods annotated with. Pre-passivate are invoked by the container before it passivates the enterprise bean, meaning that the container temporarily removes the bean from the environment and saves it to secondary storage. Lifecycle callback methods must return void and have no parameters. Business methods. The primary purpose of a session bean is to run business tasks for the client. The client invokes business methods on the object reference it gets from dependency injection or JNDI lookup. From the client's perspective, the business methods appear to run locally, although they run remotely in the session bean. The following code snippet shows how the cart client program invokes the business methods. Cart. Create Duke de Earl, 123. Cart. Add book Bel Canto. List. String. Book list equal cart. Get contents. Cart. Remove book gravity's rainbow. The cart bean class implements the business methods in the following code. Public void add book string title contents. Add element title. Public void remove book string title throws book exception boolean result equal contents. Remove title. If result false throw new book exception title plus not in cart. Public list. String. Get contents return contents. The signature of a business method must conform to these rules. The method name must not begin with EJB to avoid conflicts with callback methods defined by the EJB architecture. For example, you cannot call a business method EJB create or EJB activate. The access control modifier must be public. If the bean allows remote access through a remote business interface, the arguments and return types must be legal types for the Java remote method invocation or MIOP. If the bean is a web service endpoint, the arguments and return types for the methods annotated. Web method must be legal types for JAX-WS. The modifier must not be static or final. The throws clause can include exceptions that you define for your application. The remove book method, for example, throws a book exception if the book is not in the cart. To indicate a system-level problem, such as the inability to connect to a database, a business method should throw a Javax. EJB. Edge exception. The container will not wrap application exceptions, such as book exception. Because edge exception is a subclass of runtime exception, you do not need to include it in the throws clause of the business method. The Remove method. Business methods annotated with JAVAX. EJB. Remove in the stateful session bean class can be invoked by Enterprise Bean clients to remove the bean instance. The container will remove the Enterprise Bean after a remove method completes, either normally or abnormally. In cart bean, the remove method is a remove method. Remove public void remove contents equal null. Helper classes. The cart bean session bean has two helper classes, book exception and id verifier. The book exception is thrown by the remove book method, and the id verifier validates the customer id in one of the create methods. Helper classes may reside in an EJB jar file that contains the Enterprise Bean class, a WAR file if the Enterprise Bean is packaged within a WAR, or in an EAR that contains an EJB jar or a WAR file that contains an Enterprise Bean. Building, packaging, deploying, and running the cart example. Now you are ready to compile the remote interface cart. Java, the home interface cart home. Java, the Enterprise Bean class cart bean. Java, the client class cart client. Java, and the helper classes book exception. Java and id verifier. Java. Follow these steps. You can build, package, deploy, and run the cart application using either NetBeans IDE or the Ant tool. To build, package, deploy, and run the cart example using NetBeans IDE. From the File menu, choose Open Project. In the Open Project dialog, navigate to tut-install. Examples. EJB. Select the cart folder. Select the Open as Main Project and Open Required Projects checkboxes. Click Open Project. In the Projects tab, right-click the cart project and select Deploy. This builds and packages the application into cart. Here, located in tut-install. Examples. EJB. Cart. Dist. And deploys this EAR file to your Glassfish server instance. From the Run menu, choose Run Main Project. You will see the output of the cart application client in the output pane. Retrieving book title from cart. Infinite Jest retrieving book title from cart. Bellcato retrieving book title from cart. Kafka on the shore removing Gravity's Rainbow from cart. Kana book exception. Gravity's Rainbow not in cart. Java result. 1 Run cart app client. Run and build successful total time 14 seconds. To build, package, deploy, and run the cart example using it. In a terminal window, go to tut-install. Examples. EJB. Cart. Type the following command, and this command calls the default target, which builds and packages the application into an EAR file, cart. Here, located in the dist directory. Type the following command, and deploy. The cart. Your file is deployed to the Glassfish server. Type the following command, and run. This task retrieves the application client jar, cart client. Jar, and runs the application client, the client jar, cart client. Jar contains the application client class, the helper class book exception, and the cart business interface. This task is equivalent to running the following command, app client cart client. Jar. When you run the client, the application client container injects any component references declared in the application client class, in this case the reference to the cart Enterprise Bean. The all task. As a convenience, the all task will build, package, deploy, and run the application. To do this, enter the following command. And all a singleton session bean example. Counter. The counter example demonstrates how to create a singleton session bean. Creating a singleton session bean. The JAVAX. EJB. Singleton annotation is used to specify that the Enterprise Bean implementation class is a singleton session bean. Singleton public class singleton bean. Initializing singleton session beans. The EJB container is responsible for determining when to initialize a singleton session bean instance unless the singleton session bean implementation class is annotated with a JAVAX. EJB. Startup annotation. In this case, sometimes called eager initialization, the EJB container must initialize the singleton session bean upon application startup. The singleton session bean is initialized before the EJB container delivers client requests to any enterprise beans in the application. This allows the singleton session bean to perform, for example, application startup tasks. The following singleton session bean stores the status of an application and is eagerly initialized. Startup. Singleton public class status bean private string status, post construct void init status equal ready. Sometimes multiple singleton session beans are used to initialize data for an application and therefore must be initialized in a specific order. In these cases, use the JAVX. EJB depends on annotation to declare the startup dependencies of the singleton session bean. The depends on annotation's value attribute as one or more strings that specify the name of the target singleton session bean, if more than one dependent singleton bean is specified in. Depends on, the order in which they are listed is not necessarily the order in which the EJB container will initialize the target singleton session beans. The following singleton session bean, primary bean, should be started up first. Singleton public class primary bean. Secondary bean depends on primary bean. Singleton depends on primary bean public class secondary bean. This guarantees that the EJB container will initialize primary bean before secondary bean. The following singleton session bean, tertiary bean, depends on primary bean and secondary bean. Singleton depends on primary bean, secondary bean public class tertiary bean. Secondary bean explicitly requires primary bean to be initialized before it is initialized, through its own. Depends on annotation. In this case, the EJB container will first initialize primary bean, then secondary bean, and finally tertiary bean. If, however, secondary bean did not explicitly depend on primary bean, the EJB container may initialize either primary bean or secondary bean first. That is, the EJB container could initialize the singletons in the following order: secondary bean, primary bean, tertiary bean. Managing concurrent access in a singleton session bean. Singleton session beans are designed for concurrent access, situations in which many clients need to access a single instance of a session bean at the same time. A singleton's client needs only a reference to a singleton in order to invoke any business methods exposed by the singleton and doesn't need to worry about any other clients that may be simultaneously invoking business methods on the same singleton. When creating a singleton session bean, concurrent access to the singleton's business methods can be controlled in two ways: container managed concurrency and bean managed concurrency. The JAVX EJB concurrency management annotation is used to specify container managed or bean managed concurrency for the singleton. With concurrency management, a type attribute must be set to either JAVX EJB concurrency management type container or JAVX EJB concurrency management type bean. If no concurrency management annotation is present on the singleton implementation class, the EJB container default of container managed concurrency is used. Container managed concurrency. If a singleton uses container managed concurrency, the EJB container controls client access to the business methods of the singleton. The JAVX EJB lock annotation and the JAVX EJB lock type are used to specify the access level of the singleton's business methods or timeout methods. Annotate a singleton's business or timeout method with lock read if the method can be concurrently accessed or shared with many clients. Annotate the business or timeout method with lock write if the singleton session bean should be locked to other clients while a client is calling that method. Typically, the lock write annotation is used when clients are modifying the state of the singleton. Annotating a singleton class with lock specifies that all the business methods and any timeout methods of the singleton will use the specified lock type unless they explicitly set the lock type with the method level. Lock annotation. If no lock annotation is present on the singleton class, the default lock type, lock right, is applied to all business and timeout methods. The following example shows how to use the concurrency management, lock read, and lock write annotations for a singleton that uses container-managed concurrency. Although by default, singletons use container-managed concurrency, the concurrency management container annotation may be added at the class level of the singleton to explicitly set the concurrency management type. Concurrency management container. Singleton public class example singleton bean private string state, lock read public string get state return state, lock write public void set state string new state equal new state. The getState method can be accessed by many clients at the same time because it is annotated with lock read. When the setState method is called, however, all the methods in example singleton bean will be locked to other clients because setState is annotated with lock write. This prevents two clients from attempting to simultaneously change the state variable of example singleton bean. The getData and getStatus methods in the following singleton are of type read, and the setStatus method is of type write. Singleton lock read public class shared singleton bean private string data, private string status, public string get data return data, public string get status return status, lock write public void set status string new status equal new status. If a method is of locking type write, client access to all the singleton's methods is blocked until the current client finishes its method call or an access timeout occurs. When an access timeout occurs, the EJB container throws the JAVX EJB concurrent access timeout exception. The JAVX EJB access timeout annotation is used to specify the number of milliseconds before an access timeout occurs. If added at the class level of a singleton, access timeout specifies the access timeout value for all methods in a singleton unless a method explicitly overrides the default with its own access timeout annotation. The access timeout annotation can be applied to both lock read and lock write methods. The access timeout annotation has one required element, value, and one optional element, unit. By default, the value is specified in milliseconds. To change the value unit, set unit to one of the Java util concurrent time unit constants, nanoseconds, microseconds, milliseconds, or seconds. The following singleton has a default access timeout value of 120,000 milliseconds, or 2 minutes. The doTedious operation method overrides the default access timeout and sets the value to 360,000 milliseconds, or 6 minutes. Singleton access timeout value equal 120,000 public class data singleton bean private string status. Lock write public void set status string new status equal new status. Lock write access timeout value equal 360,000 public void doTedious operation. The following singleton has a default access timeout value of 60 seconds, specified using the time unit seconds constant. Singleton access timeout value equal 60 time unit equal seconds public class data singleton bean managed concurrency. Singletons that use bean managed concurrency allow full concurrent access to all the business and timeout methods in a singleton. The developer of the singleton is responsible for ensuring that the state of the singleton is synchronized across all clients. Developers who create singletons with bean managed concurrency are allowed to use the Java programming language synchronization primitives, such as synchronization and volatile, to prevent errors during concurrent access. Add a concurrency management annotation at the class level of the singleton to specify bean managed concurrency. Concurrency management bean singleton public class another singleton bean. Handling errors in a singleton session bean. If a singleton session bean encounters an error when initialized by the EJB container, that singleton instance will be destroyed. Unlike other enterprise beans, once a singleton session bean instance is initialized, it is not destroyed if the singleton's business or lifecycle methods cause system exceptions. This ensures that the same singleton instance is used throughout the application lifecycle. The architecture of the counterexample. The counterexample consists of a singleton session bean, counter bean, and a Java server facelets web front end. Counter bean is a simple singleton with one method, getHits, that returns an integer representing the number of times a web page has been accessed. Here is the code of counter bean. Package counter. EJB, import JAVX. EJB. Singleton. Counter bean is a simple singleton session bean that records the number of hits to a web page. Singleton public class counter bean private int hits equal 1, increment and return the number of hits public and get hits return hits. The singleton annotation marks counter bean as a singleton session bean. Counter bean uses a local, no interface view. Counter bean uses the EJB container's default metadata values for singletons to simplify the coding of the singleton implementation class. There is no concurrency management annotation on the class, so the default of container managed concurrency access is applied. There is no lock annotation on the class or business method, so the default of lock write is applied to the only business method, getHits. The following version of counter bean is functionally equivalent to the preceding version. Package counter. EJB, import JAVX. EJB. Singleton, import JAVX. EJB. Concurrency management, import static JAVX. EJB, concurrency management type. Container, import JAVX. EJB. Lock, import JAVX. EJB. Lock type. Write. Counter bean is a simple singleton session bean that records the number of hits to a web page. Singleton. Concurrency management container public class counter bean private int hits equal 1. Increment and return the number of hits. Lock write public and get hits return hits. The web front end of counter consists of a Java server faces managed bean count. Java, that is used by the facelets XHTML files template. XHTML and template client. XHTML. The count Java server faces managed bean obtains a reference to counter bean through dependency injection. Count defines a hit count Java beans property. When the getHitCount getter method is called from the XHTML files, counter beans getHits method is called to return the current number of page hits. Here's the count managed bean class. Managed bean. Session scope public class count. EJB private counter bean private int hit count, public count this. Hit count equals 0. Public and get hit count equal counter bean. Get hits. Return a count, public void set hit count and new hits this. Hit count equal new hits. The template. XHTML and template client. XHTML files are used to render a facelets view that displays the number of hits to that view. The template client. XHTML file uses an expression language statement, count. Hit count, to access the hit count property of the count managed bean. Here is the content of template client. XHTML. XML version equal 1. 0 encoding equal UTF-8. Type HTML public. W3C. DTD-XHTML1. 0 transitional. ENHTTP. W3. Org. TR. XHTML1. DTD. XHTML1 transitional. DTD. HTML-XMLNS equal HTTP. W3. Org. 1999. XHTML-XMLNS. UI equal HTTP. Java. Sun. Com. JSF. Facelets. XMLNS. Our equal HTTP. Java. Sun. Com. JSF. HTML. Body. This text above will not be displayed. UI. Composition template equal. Template. XHTML. This text will not be displayed. UI. Define name equal title. This page has been accessed count. Hit count time S. UI. Define. This text will also not be displayed. UI. Define name equal body. Array. UI. Define. This text will not be displayed. UI. Composition. This text below will also not be displayed. Body. HTML. Building, packaging, deploying, and running the counterexample. The counterexample application can be built, deployed, and run using NetBeans IDE or app. To build, package, deploy, and run the counterexample using NetBeans IDE. From the File menu, choose Open Project. In the Open Project dialog, navigate to tut-install. Examples. EJB. Select the counter folder. Select the Open as Main Project checkbox. Click Open Project. In the Projects tab, right-click the counter project and select Run. A web browser will open the URL http localhost 8080 counter, which displays the number of hits. Click the browser's refresh button to see the hit count increment. To build, package, deploy, and run the counterexample using it. In a terminal window, go to tut-install. Examples. EJB. Counter. Type the following command, and all this will build and deploy counter to your Glassfish server instance. In a web browser, type the following URL, http localhost 8080 counter. Click the browser's refresh button to see the hit count increment. A web service example. HelloService. This example demonstrates a simple web service that generates a response based on information received from the client. HelloServiceBean is a stable session bean that implements a single method. Say hello. This method matches the say hello method invoked by the client described in a simple JAX-WS application client. The Web Service Endpoint Implementation class. HelloServiceBean is the endpoint implementation class, typically the primary programming artifact for enterprise Bean web service endpoints. The Web Service Endpoint Implementation class has the following requirements. The class must be annotated with either the JAVX, JWS, Web Service or the JAVX, JWS, Web Service Provider annotation. The implementing class may explicitly reference an SCI through the endpoint interface element of the web service annotation but is not required to do so. If no endpoint interface is specified in web service, an SCI is implicitly defined for the implementing class. The business methods of the implementing class must be public and must not be declared static or final. Business methods that are exposed to web service clients must be annotated with JAVX, JWS, web method. Business methods that are exposed to web service clients must have JAXB compatible parameters and return types. See the list of JAXB default data type bindings at type supported by JAX-WS. The implementing class must not be declared final and must not be abstract. The implementing class must have a default public constructor. The endpoint class must be annotated. Stateless. The implementing class must not define a finalize method. The implementing class may use the JAVX annotation, post-construct or JAVX annotation. Pre-destroy annotations on its methods for lifecycle event callbacks. The post-construct method is called by the container before the implementing class begins responding to web service clients. The pre-destroy method is called by the container before the endpoint is removed from operation. Stateless Session Bean Implementation Class. The HelloServiceBean class implements the sayHello method, which is annotated. Web method. The source code for the HelloServiceBean class follows: package com, sun, tutorial, JVE, EJB, import JAVX, EJB, stateless, import JAVX, JWS, Web method, import JavaX. JWS. Web service, stateless. Web service public class HelloServiceBean private string message equal hello. Public void HelloServiceBean. Web method public string say hello string name return message plus name plus semicolon. Building, packaging, deploying, and testing the HelloService example. You can build, package, and deploy the HelloService example using either NetBeans IDE or Ant. You can then use the administration console to test the web service endpoint methods, to build, package, and deploy the HelloService example using NetBeans IDE. From the File menu, choose Open Project. In the Open Project dialog, navigate to tut-install. Examples. EJB. Select the HelloService folder. Select the Open as Main Project and Open Required Projects checkboxes. Click Open Project. In the Projects tab, right-click the HelloService project and select Deploy. This builds and packages the application into HelloService. Here, located in tut-install. Examples. EJB, HelloService. Dist, and deploys this EAR file to the Glassfish server. To build, package, and deploy the HelloService example using Ant. In a terminal window, go to tut-install. Examples. EJB, HelloService. Type the following command, and this runs the default task, which compiles the source files and packages the application into a jar file located at tut-install. Examples. EJB, HelloService. Dist, HelloService. Jar. To deploy HelloService, type the following command, and deploy. Upon deployment, the Glassfish server generates additional artifacts required for web service invocation, including the WSDL file. To test the service without a client, the Glassfish server administration console allows you to test the methods of a web service endpoint. To test the say hello method of HelloServiceBean, follow these steps. Open the administration console by opening the following URL in a web browser. http localhost 4848. In the left pane of the administration console, select the Applications node. In the Applications table, click HelloService. In the Modules and Components table, click View Endpoint. On the Web Service Endpoint Information page, click the tester link. HelloServiceBeanService. HelloServiceBean Tester. A Web Service Test Links page opens. On the Web Service Test Links page, click the non-secure link, the one that specifies port 8080. A HelloServiceBeanService Web Service Tester page opens. Under Methods, type a name as the parameter to the Say Hello method. Click the Say Hello button. The Say Hello method invocation page opens. Under Method Returned, you'll see the response from the endpoint, using the timer service. Applications that model business workflows often rely on timed notifications. The timer service of the EnterpriseBean container enables you to schedule timed notifications for all types of Enterprise beans except for stateful session beans. You can schedule a timed notification to occur according to a calendar schedule, at a specific time, after a duration of time, or at timed intervals. For example, you could set timers to go off at 10:30 a.m. on May 23rd, in 30 days, or every 12 hours. EnterpriseBean timers are either programmatic timers or automatic timers. Programmatic timers are set by explicitly calling one of the timer creation methods of the timer service interface. Automatic timers are created upon the successful deployment of an EnterpriseBean that contains a method annotated with the Java EJB schedule or Java EJB schedules annotations, creating calendar-based timer expressions. Timers can be set according to a calendar-based schedule, expressed using a syntax similar to the Unix cron utility. Both programmatic and automatic timers can use calendar-based timer expressions. Table 24-1 shows the calendar-based timer attributes. Table 24-1 calendar-based timer attributes attribute description allowable values default value example second 1 or more seconds within a minute. 0 to 59 0 second equal 30 minute 1 or more minutes within an hour. 0 to 59 0 minute equal 15 hour 1 or more hours within a day. 0 to 23 0 hour equal 13 day of week 1 or more days within a week. 0 to 7 both 0 and 7 refer to Sunday, Sun, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Day of week equal 3 day of week equal Monday. Day of month 1 or more days within the month. 1 to 31-7 to -1 a negative number means the nth day or days before the end of the month. Last first, second, third, fourth, fifth, last Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Day of month equal 15 day of month equal -3 day of month equal last day of month equal second Friday month 1 or more months within a year. 1 to 12 Jan, Feb, March, APR, May, Junior, Jul, Aug, Sep, Oct, Nov, Dec. Month equal 7 month equal July year a particular calendar year 4-digit calendar year. Year equal 2010. Specifying multiple values in calendar expressions. You can specify multiple values in calendar expressions, as described in the following sections. Using wildcards in calendar expressions. Setting an attribute to an asterisk symbol represents all allowable values for the attribute. The following expression represents every minute. Minute equal the following expression represents every day of the week. Day of week equal. Specifying a list of values. To specify 2 or more values for an attribute, use a comma to separate the values. A range of values is allowed as part of a list. Wildcards and intervals, however, are not allowed. Duplicates within a list are ignored. The following expression sets the day of the week to Tuesday and Thursday. Day of week equal Tuesday, Thursday. The following expression represents 4 OOA every hour from 9 OOA to 5 OOP using a range at 10 OOP hour equal 4 9-17 22. Specifying a range of values. Use a dash character to specify an inclusive range of values for an attribute. Members of a range cannot be wildcards, lists, or intervals. A range of the form XX is equivalent to the single-valued expression X. A range of the form XY where X is greater than Y is equivalent to the expression X maximum value, minimum value Y. That is, the expression begins at X, rolls over to the beginning of the allowable values, and continues up to Y. The following expression represents 9 OOA to 5 OOP hour equal 9-17. The following expression represents Friday through Monday. Day of week equal 5-1. The following expression represents the 25th day of the month to the end of the month, and the beginning of the month to the 5th day of the month. Day of month equal 25-5. It is equivalent to the following expression. Day of month equal 25 last 1-5. Specifying intervals. The / constrains an attribute to a starting point and an interval and is used to specify every n seconds, minutes, or hours within the minute, hour, or day. For an expression of the form X, Y, X represents the starting point and Y represents the interval. The wildcard character may be used in the X position of an interval and is equivalent to setting X to 0. Intervals may be set only for second, minute, and hour attributes. The following expression represents every 10 minutes within the hour. Minute equal 10. It is equivalent to minute equals 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. The following expression represents every 2 hours starting at noon. Hour equal 12. 2. Programmatic timers. When a programmatic timer expires goes off, the container calls the method annotated timeout in the Beans implementation class. The timeout method contains the business logic that handles the timed event. The timeout method. Methods annotated. Timeout in the Enterprise Bean class must return void and optionally take a JAVX. EJB. Timer object is the only parameter. They may not throw application exceptions. Timeout public void timeout timer system. Out. Print on timer bean. Timeout occurred. Creating programmatic timers. To create a timer, the bean invokes one of the create methods of the timer service interface. These methods allow single action, interval, or calendar-based timers to be created. For single action or interval timers, the expiration of the timer can be expressed as either a duration or an absolute time. The duration is expressed as the number of milliseconds before a timeout event is triggered. To specify an absolute time, create a Java util date object and pass it to the timer service. Create single action timer or the timer service. Create timer method. The following code sets a programmatic timer that will expire in 1 minute 6000 milliseconds. Long duration equals 6000. Timer equal timer service. Create single action timer duration, new timer config. The following code sets a programmatic timer that will expire at 12:05 p.m. on May 1, 2010, specified as a Java util date. Simple date formatter equal new simple date formatter 2000. dd e at hh mm date equal formatter. Parse 05/01 2010 at 12:05. Timer equal timer service. Create single action timer date, new timer config. For calendar-based timers, the expiration of the timer is expressed as a JAVX. EJB. Schedule expression object, passed as a parameter to the timer service. Create calendar timer method. The schedule expression class represents calendar-based timer expressions and has methods that correspond to the attributes described in creating calendar-based timer expressions. The following code creates a programmatic timer using the schedule expression helper class. Schedule expression schedule equal new schedule expression. Schedule. Day of week Monday. Schedule. Hour 12-17:23. Timer equal timer service. Create calendar timer schedule. For details on the method signatures, see the timer service API documentation at http. Download. Oracle.com. Java 6. API. JAVX. EJB. Timer service. HTML. The bean described in the timer session example creates a timer as follows. Timer equal timer service. Create timer interval duration, create a new programmatic timer. In the timer session example, create timer is invoked in a business method, which is called by a client. Timers are persistent by default. If the server is shut down or crashes, persistent timers are saved and will become active again when the server is restarted. If a persistent timer expires while the server is down, the container will call the timeout method when the server is restarted. Non-persistent programmatic timers are created by calling timer config. Set persistent false and passing the timer config object to one of the timer creation methods. The date and long parameters of the create timer methods represent time with a resolution of milliseconds. However, because the timer service is not intended for real-time applications, a callback to the timeout method might not occur with millisecond precision. The timer service is for business applications, which typically measure time in hours, days, or longer durations. Automatic timers. Automatic timers are created by the EJB container when an enterprise bean that contains methods annotated with a schedule or schedules annotations is deployed. An enterprise bean can have multiple automatic timeout methods, unlike a programmatic timer, which allows only one method annotated with a timeout annotation in the enterprise bean class. Automatic timers can be configured through annotations or through the EJB jar. XML deployment descriptor, adding a schedule annotation on an enterprise bean marks that method as a timeout method according to the calendar schedule specified in the attributes of schedule. The Schedule annotation has elements that correspond to the calendar expressions detailed in creating calendar-based timer expressions and the persistent, info, and timezoni elements. The optional persistent element takes a Boolean value and is used to specify whether the automatic timer should survive a server restart or crash. By default, all automatic timers are persistent. The optional timezoni element is used to specify that the automatic timer is associated with a particular time zone. If set, this element will evaluate all timer expressions in relation to the specified time zone, regardless of the time zone in which the EJB container is running. By default, all automatic timers set are in relation to the default time zone of the server. The optional info element is used to set an informational description of the timer. A timer's information can be retrieved later by using timer getInfo. The following timeout method uses schedule to set a timer that will expire every Sunday at midnight. Schedule day of week equals sun, hour equals 0 public void cleanup week data. The schedule's annotation is used to specify multiple calendar-based timer expressions for a given timeout method. The following timeout method uses the schedule's annotation to set multiple calendar-based timer expressions. The first expression sets a timer to expire on the last day of every month. The second expression sets a timer to expire every Friday at 11 p.m. Schedules. Schedule day of month equal last. Schedule day of week equal Friday, hour equal 23. Public void do periodic cleanup. Canceling and saving timers. Timers can be canceled by the following events. When a single event timer expires, the EJB container calls the associated timeout method and then cancels the timer. When the bean invokes the cancel method of the timer interface, the container cancels the timer. If a method is invoked on a cancelled timer, the container throws the JAVX EJB, no such object local exception. To save a timer object for future reference, invoke its getHandle method and store the timer handle object in a database. A timer handle object is serializable. To reinstantiate the timer object, retrieve the handle from the database and invoke getTimer on the handle. A timer handle object cannot be passed as an argument of a method defined in a remote or web service interface. In other words, remote clients and web service clients cannot access a Bean's timer handle object. Local clients, however, do not have this restriction, getting timer information. In addition to defining the cancel and getHandle methods, the timer interface defines methods for obtaining information about timers. Public long getTime remaining. Public Java. Util. Date get next timeout. Public Java. IO. Serializable getInfo. The getInfo method returns the object that was the last parameter of the createTimer invocation. For example, in the createTimer code snippet of the preceding section, this information parameter is a string object with the value createTimer. To retrieve all of a Bean's active timers, call the getTimers method of the timer service interface. The getTimers method returns a collection of timer objects, transactions and timers. An enterprise bean usually creates a timer within a transaction. If this transaction is rolled back, the timer creation also is rolled back. Similarly, if a bean cancels a timer within a transaction that gets rolled back, the timer cancellation is rolled back. In this case, the timer's duration is reset as if the cancellation had never occurred. In beans that use container-managed transactions, the timeout method usually has the required or requires new transaction attribute to preserve transaction integrity. With these attributes, the EJB container begins the new transaction before calling the timeout method. If the transaction is rolled back, the container will call the timeout method at least one more time. The timer session example. The source code for this example is in the tut-install. Examples: EJB, timer session, src, Java, directory. Timer session bean is a singleton session bean that shows how to set both an automatic timer and a programmatic timer. In the source code listing of timer session bean that follows, the set timer and Timeout methods are used to set a programmatic timer. A timer service instance is injected by the container when the bean is created. Because it's a business method, setTimer is exposed to the local, no-interface view of timer session bean and can be invoked by the client. In this example, the client invokes setTimer with an interval duration of 30,000 milliseconds. The setTimer method creates a new timer by invoking the createTimer method of timer service. Now that the timer is set, the EJB container will invoke the programmatic timeout method of timer session bean when the timer expires, in about 30 seconds. Public void setTimer long interval duration logger. Info setting a programmatic timeout for plus interval duration plus milliseconds from now. Timer equal timer service. Create timer interval duration, create a new programmatic timer. Timeout public void programmatic timeout timer this. Set last programmatic timeout new date. Logger. Info programmatic timeout occurred. Timer session bean also has an automatic timer and timeout method, automatic timeout. The automatic timer is set to expire every 3 minutes and is set by using a calendar-based timer expression in the schedule annotation. Schedule minute equal 3 hour equal public void automatic timeout this. Set last automatic timeout new date. Logger. Info automatic timeout occurred. Timer session bean also has two business methods. Get last programmatic timeout and get last automatic timeout. Clients call these methods to get the date and time of the last timeout for the programmatic timer and automatic timer, respectively. Here's the source code for the timer session bean class. Package timer session. EJB, import Java. Util. Date, import Java. Util. Logging. Logger, import JavaX. Annotation. Resource, import JavaX. EJB. Schedule, import JavaX. EJB. Stateless, import JavaX. EJB. Timeout, import JavaX. EJB. Timer, import JavaX. EJB. Timer service, singleton public class timer session bean. Resource timer service. Private date last programmatic timeout. Private date last automatic timeout. Private logger equal logger. Get logger Sun. Tutorial. Java. EJB. Timer session bean. Public void set timer long interval duration logger. Info setting a programmatic timeout for plus interval duration plus milliseconds from now. Timer equal timer service. Create timer interval duration, create a new programmatic timer. Timeout public void programmatic timeout timer this. Set last programmatic timeout new date. Logger. Info programmatic timeout occurred. Schedule minute equal 3 hour equal public void automatic timeout this. Set last automatic timeout new date. Logger. Info automatic timeout occurred. Public string get last programmatic timeout if last programmatic timeout equal no return last programmatic timeout to string else return never. Public void set last programmatic timeout date last timeout this. Last programmatic timeout equal last timeout. Public string get last automatic timeout if last automatic timeout equal no return last automatic timeout to string else return never. Public void set last automatic timeout date last automatic timeout this. Last automatic timeout equal last automatic timeout. Note, Glassfish server has a default minimum timeout value of 1000 milliseconds, or 1 second. If you need to set the timeout value lower than 1000 milliseconds, change the value of the minimum delivery interval in milliselement in domain dir. Config. Domain. XML. The lowest practical value for minimum delivery interval in millis is around 10 milliseconds, owing to virtual machine constraints. Building, packaging, deploying, and running the timer session example. You can build, package, deploy, and run the timer session example by using either NetBeans IDE or Ent. To build, package, deploy, and run the timer session example using NetBeans IDE. From the File menu, choose Open Project. In the Open Project dialog, navigate to tut-install. Examples. EJB. Select the timer session folder. Select the Open as Main Project checkbox. Click Open Project. From the Run menu, choose Run Main Project. This builds and packages the application into a timer session. Or, located in tut-install. Examples. EJB, timer session. Dist. Deploys this WAR file to your Glassfish server instance, and then runs the web client. To build, package, and deploy the timer session example using it. In a terminal window, go to tut-install. Examples. EJB, timer session. Type the following command, and this runs the default task, which compiles the source files and packages the application into a WAR file located at tut-install. Examples. EJB, timer session. Dist, timer session. Or, to deploy the application, type the following command, and deploy to run the web client. Open a web browser to HTTP. Localhost 8080, timer session. Click the Set Timer button to set a programmatic timer. Wait for a while and click the browser's refresh button. You will see the date and time of the last programmatic and automatic timeouts. To see the messages that are logged when a timeout occurs, open the server log file located in domain dir. Server logs. Handling exceptions. The exceptions thrown by Enterprise Beans fall into two categories. System and application. A system exception indicates a problem with the services that support an application. For example, a connection to an external resource cannot be obtained, or an injected resource cannot be found. If it encounters a system-level problem, your Enterprise Bean should throw a JAVX. EJB. Edge exception. Because the edge exception is a subclass of the runtime exception, you do not have to specify it in the throws clause of the method declaration. If a system exception is thrown, the EJB container might destroy the Bean instance. Therefore, a system exception cannot be handled by the Beans client program, but instead requires intervention by a system administrator. An application exception signals an error in the business logic of an Enterprise Bean. Application exceptions are typically exceptions that you've coded yourself, such as the book exception thrown by the business methods of the card bean example. When an Enterprise Bean throws an application exception, the container does not wrap it in another exception. The client should be able to handle any application exception it receives. If a system exception occurs within a transaction, the EJB container rolls back the transaction. However, if an application exception is thrown within a transaction, the container does not roll back the transaction.